Hello, innovators. I'm Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. Today, I'm talking with Jonathan Aberman. He is a musician, innovation expert, everlasting academic, radio show host, and partner for Ruxton Ventures. Thank you for joining me on the Polymath podcast.
Dustin, great to be here. Thanks for including me.
I love to have interesting people, and I love running out of breath whenever I give them their introduction there. So thank you for making me run out of breath.
Well, you know what? The last 40 years of my life have just been about creating the content for that introduction. So you're welcome.
Well, and you have a lot of content in the background there, and we'll definitely get into this each avenue of what you make. The way I like to break the ice is to have you share something about yourself that no one knows about you.
The thing that most people would know about me is I dropped out of high school.
Okay.
Because, you don't tend to put that on LinkedIn when you do intros. But I was more interested when I was in high school in playing the guitar and basketball than I was in going to school. And I basically crashed and burned. In a lot of ways, that was, funnily enough, a really formative experience for me because, well, the truth of the matter is that I spent a good chunk of my junior year messing around. And one day the school finally caught up with me. I went to public high schools in Philly, and all my friends were not white because I played basketball and I like to shoot pool and I like to do music. And a lot of the creatives at my school tend not to, we're not middle class or upper middle class white kids. And what happened was they caught up with me and brought me in. And, my mom was angry at the school and the principal, and my principal threw out of the office, and he looked at me and he said, I really don't give a crap about you. If you want to ruin your life, it's completely up to you. But if you don't want to ruin your life, I'll let you go to night school at Philly in the worst neighborhood in town. And if you do that, I'll let you be here during the day. And if you get good grades, let you graduate. And there was something about the way he said it that made me so angry that, how dare you tell me you don't care about me, that I decided to stick it to him by going after it, which of course is what he wanted me to do. So the first life lesson I really learned was, that at the end of the day, nobody really cares about you other than your family. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't perform, right? So learn that lesson. But the other lesson I learned, which took me longer to absorb, was the lesson of privilege. Because now I went to high school at night with immigrants and people who were not fortunate at all in North Philly. And anybody who's watching this and knows Philadelphia, North Philly is sort of like many other cities. There's a part that's across the tracks where it tends to be rough. And to this day, I don't know how I survived, but I guess people just sort of assumed I was there for a good reason. So the initial lesson I took away was, a lot of these people aren't as fortunate as me. But frankly, I really didn't take away the lesson of privilege and the fact that when I look back at it, out of all my posse, the only person who actually got a call was me because, to be blunt, they couldn't understand why a white kid was dropping out, but they never called any of my friends. And a lot of my friends, frankly, dropped out, and God knows what happened to them. So, funnily enough, in a lot of ways, that experience may be one of the most formative parts of my life for the reasons I described. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it, but a lot of things that drive me and a lot of the ways I decide whether or not something's worth my time is in some ways driven by this sense of feeling fortunate, but also a sense of wanting other people to have the opportunities that I got just by virtue of, frankly, being born in the right family.
Right. And I wonder, too, that low point in academia, public school, obviously, probably drove you a lot more to be more active as an adult in academia from, teaching and all the different kinds of stuff you do with universities. I
think that's true. I think that, frankly, high school and grammar school bored the crap out of me. I think that in a lot of ways, I just found it all just very dull. Probably because I guess I am an intelligent person and I like to be challenged. And so I was just sort of phoning it in, to be honest. Frankly, what happened was I hit 17. This experience happened to me. And I guess the best way to describe it is I just got the eye of the tiger, which is an old school phrase, but I think it still is relevant, which is...
Good song, too.
It's a great song. I actually remember seeing Frank Stallone prepare that song when live down the street from where I grew up when he was just a palooka And his
Wow.
only claim to fame was he was the brother of another Palooka. But anyway, but the eye of the tiger, that you will literally do whatever you have to do to succeed. I think I very much interpreted and just internalized that.
Mhm.
And from that moment forward, I mean, when I got to GW, I'll never forget, this may say something about my relationship with my mom, but I went off to college and she looked at me and I said, look, just so you know, I'm going to make Dean's List every semester I'm there. I went to GW because somebody I worked for after school vouched for me. I never should have gotten into a college, but I did. And anyway, I went off my first semester, and she said, "If you make Dean's List, I'll eat your report card." So I got straight A's, and I sent her my report card, and never looked back. She didn't need it, but anyway, maybe again a little bit of psychological games that kind of worked. But
Yeah.
for years, I was motivated as much to succeed because I was driven to show people that were wrong about me, and
Mhm.
frankly, really succeeding because it made me happy. And that was a lesson that I learned later in life, in my late 30s, early 40s, when I realized that at some point you don't live your life for other people, you have to live it for yourself.
Well, Jonathan, you're making me like you even more. I definitely agree with a lot of that sentiment there, where it's just you got to live your life for what you want to do, and if you have the eye of the tiger pulling you towards something, you got to keep pushing toward it, no matter what people say.
Well, I'll
And
tell you a story that sort of
yeah,
highlighted, again, since we're sharing life moments to help, your listeners, and hopefully they're finding this interesting. So I had the eye of the tiger, and the way and we'll talk about music in a moment. I did really want to be a professional musician, but no, my family really took that seriously. They didn't value it for the oldest child of a family. They wanted me to be professional, and a lot of pressure on me. And I ended up going to really good universities, primarily in England and also in the U.S. And I ended up working for places like Goldman Sachs and major American law firms, and became a really well-respected venture capital and corporate lawyer. And one of the clients I had was a Carlyle Group. And one Christmas, my mom was in town, and we had Christmas Day, and my wife Veronica gave me a book about the Carlyle Group, and I opened up the book, opened up the gift. I was like, "Wow, it's Carlyle Group." And my mom looked at it and said, "Why would Veronica give you a book on the Carlyle Group?" And I said, and she said, "Well, because he's Jonathan's client." My mother said, "Why would they have you as their lawyer?" I was like, "What the? Thanks, Mom." And so I was already not feeling too fondly towards her, I suppose, that day. And eventually we ended up going out to a hockey game. And because I wanted to have a good time with my two young kids and, my wife and my mom, I took a box that one of my clients had at the local stadium, and we're watching a hockey game. And the hockey game's fine. We're sitting in the box. My mom turns to me and she says, my dad had deceased by then. And she said, you're living your father's dream. And I know she meant it as a compliment, but I took a step back and I went home that night and I thought, you know what? She's right. I'm living my father's dream, but what about my dream? And it was interesting. It really set me off in a whole different direction of inquiry that ultimately resulted in me stop practicing law and started Amplify Ventures, my own business, because I realized that I really didn't want to sell time by the hour. I really wanted to help people grow companies as a principal. And that was not my father's dream. It was not my mother's dream. And frankly, my mom didn't talk to me for 18 months after I made the decision because she was so pissed off that I walked away from this life that was her and my father's dream for me. She got over it, though.
at the time that she said that, did you have an idea of what your dream was, or did you have to find it through introspection?
Uh, no, of course not. I think that, when you really want to find out what makes you happy, that is not an obvious thing for most people, right? Because we get so caught up in the day to day of living our lives, the artifice of our daily lives, that anything we do is seen through that prism. So for me, it really was a function of spending time talking with friends, talking with career counselors, somebody had expertise. Actually, one of the best pieces of advice I got was from the career counselor who said to me, take every job, everything you've ever done, and write down why you like it and why you hated it. And what I realized was that I actually valued creativity enormously. As you pointed out, I'm a musician to this day. I grew up in an artistic family. My stepfather was an industrial designer. He actually designed the Campbell Soup can and the first six pack. My mom owned an art gallery, so I grew up in a very creative environment. And I realized I valued creativity and the fun and the spirit of putting rock bands together, which is what I was doing in my 18s and 20s. I really liked that, and I realized I liked technology, and I realized that I liked working for myself. And I really don't want to be in business anymore with a bunch of people that are my partners just because I happen to be in the same law firm and didn't pick them. And so I over a course of, I would say, probably a year and a half, I went through this discovery and ultimately realized that for me, the best pathway for me to do that was going to be a job where I was going to be around creative people, doing creative things, helping entrepreneurship, own my own business. And funnily enough, for me, that became a venture capital firm, which is
Mhm.
how I became a venture investor back in 2003. So I think that what I'll tell you is that anybody who is fortunate enough to be able to take a step back to figure out what makes them happy really should dignify it by truly taking the time to holistically understand themselves better.
Mhm.
And then once they understand themselves better, I think they're then better situated to put themselves in opportunities when they can be happy. It's a luxury, for sure. And we get back to privilege and being fortunate. And another reason why I feel so damn lucky. But that's how it worked out for me anyway.
What I'm really excited about is that you were able to find out these things so young in life. You have so much life ahead of you, and you have a lot of being able to things you're going to be able to do. And I
Hmm.
like how you were able to figure out this is what I want, this is how I'm going to do it, and you went and did it too, no less. One
Hmm.
thing I really find fascinating is the holistic lifestyle. And when you were talking about your education, it kind of reminded me of a topic we talked on the show before, where the education system is really meant for specialists. It's designed to make more cogs in the wheels for that factory mindset. And for people
Hmm.
like us who have that intellect, I mean, not to say that specialists don't have intellect, obviously they do, but for our kind of intellect, that multidisciplinary, multi passionate kind of mindset, where we just naturally gravitate to many different things, that schooling system is not helpful. Even a lot of universities kind of narrow people down quite a bit. There's some out there with some multidisciplinary degrees, but for the most part, it's still for that specialist. And I think that's an important point to make.
Well, so you're absolutely right. And again, my background, my higher education degrees are primarily from English universities. I left GW where I was doing undergraduate and actually left and finished early
Mhm.
to go over to an English university to study arms control. And then ultimately I went and did a master's in economics, and then I did a couple law degrees at Cambridge. And the reason why I went there instead of the American universities I got into is exactly what you described. The nice thing about the Cambridge or the English educational system is it is really driven by individual supervision. You spend time with your professor. Your professor gives you topics to write on, and then you get together either with him or her on your own or with a small group. Again, it's a luxury item. You can't operate a business like this at scale. But again, I was lucky enough through a sheer happenstance to get into this educational system. And for me, as a creative person, it was much, much better because what matters, that kind of educational context, is your level of understanding of the material, but more how you apply it and how creative you are, not how many typos are in a document or that your footnotes are in proper form. I mean, literally, lectures are optional. I mean, you can go through an entire program at an English university and never go to class. Nobody cares. You go to GD. Um, so I think that was certainly something that I've benefited from, and I will say that in my career as first an adjunct professor, then as a professor of practice, and then as a dean, putting together a really interesting multidisciplinary college as I did until recently. My mind map has always been to create those kind of educational opportunities. I think to your point, Justin, there is a tremendous push pull in our society, and a lot of it's driven by class. The people that get the opportunity to do multimodal education with multiple experiences and different perspectives tend to be the children of really wealthy families that go to the American equivalents of Cambridge and Oxford. They go to Yale, or they go to Harvard, or they go to Tufts. Um, but the people who aren't in that social class are encouraged in a lot of subtle and not subtle ways. Go get a degree, they'll get you a job. I mean, how many times do you read in the newspaper, oh, well, liberal arts degree is a terrible thing to do. You'll never get a job. And I could make an argument that, in actual fact, a really smart liberal arts student is actually much more likely to be employable than a really lazy computer science student. But
Yeah.
you never know that from the media. So I think frankly, artificial intelligence is going to be the crucible to change this, because if we don't educate people how to think and be creative, which is the stuff that I don't care. I mean, generative AI can't be creative in the same way that humans can. If we can't teach people how to be creative and use technology, they're going to be obsoleted by it, because to your point. So I think it's funny, you polymath the focus of your show. I would argue that everybody should be encouraged to be able to do a polymath right now, because the world's moving so damn fast. If you can't bring things together and think creatively, you're going to have a hard time. But of course, if you can do that, you're eminently employable, and you can be an entrepreneur and all these other wonderful things. So, that's my view of education, for what it's worth.
Infinitely adaptable, if you will. And
Yeah.
there's definitely a large rise for liberal arts degrees, it seems, all across the board.
Mm-hmm.
Something I was going to mention too is that I'm not sure if you're familiar with Christopher Bishop, but he had come on the show a while back, and he shared this idea of multimodal careers to me. That's why I had him on the show. He had a course on LinkedIn about it, and he's also a musician. He worked with ZZ Top actually as well, which was pretty cool.
Wow.
And I don't know, you and him seem pretty similar in just the way that you guys are talking. So I need to try to connect you if I can. But
Please do.
yeah, I guess we should get to the questions here, because we really quite haven't touched them just yet. One of my favorite questions to ask that I always try to do is, what was your mindset 5 years ago, and how have you changed since then?
Well, so 5 years ago, I was minding my business, literally, and the phone rang, and I was in a traffic jam, and the voice there on the phone was an old friend, said, "Where are you right now?" I said, "Right now I'm on a traffic jam on 495. I haven't moved in 10 minutes."
Mm.
And the voice said, "Well, I can fix your commute. How'd you like to come work at Marymount University?" Which is literally, I kid you not, 5-minute walk from my house.
Oh,
And
perfect.
so having never been a professional academic administrator, I decided to take on the challenge of doing a startup at a university. So my mindset 5 years ago was very, very driven by remaking education in a significant way. So everything, literally a job like that, where you take on a faculty, 1,000, 1,500 students, and you're trying to create a vision for how to educate people differently. And over the course of time, we merged the computer science school and the business school and the art and design school, and did a lot of really cool stuff. That was just consuming. I didn't have time to really think about much of anything else. What happened is I got it to the point where, frankly, it could be run by somebody who was a good administrator. It didn't need my creativity. And I was getting kind of, frankly, kind of bored with it. And
Mhm.
it was just time to go back to what I was doing before. So now my mindset every day as I get up, and believe it or not, I ask myself, what am I doing today? And is it stuff that I want to do?
Mm.
And if it's stuff that I want to do, I'm jazzed up. And if it's stuff I don't want to do, I start to think critically about, why am I doing it? I know it sounds funny, but
No, it's good.
a friend of mine put it this way. And again, she was put in the context of, as you get into your 50s and 60s, you're really creative, you're really productive, but also your time is more limited just because of mortality. And she said to me one day, she said, I think that we've gotten to a point in life where the answer for any question should be hell yes or hell no. She
Yeah.
says, no, there's no gray area. You either hell no, don't want to do it, or hell yes. She says, unless you're really excited about it, don't do it. So my mindset right now really is to grab as much happiness and salience as I can. I think that's the best way to describe it. So everything I'm doing right now, being with you on the podcast, my own radio show, investing, mentoring, teaching, it's all around, am I making the world around me better, and do I matter to people? Because I realized that that's one of the things that makes me happy is people actually feel like I'm making their lives better. So that's a mindset that's probably the same in some ways.
But still, I see that evolution there, and a couple points to make off of that. The first one is like a lot of my motivation behind the show is that I'm not trying to monetize this show. I'll monetize my other content, that kind of thing. I make this show for the community aspect and for the people that come on, because while you have quite a bit of polymathic tendencies and you kind of notice that the multimodal aspect of your careers that you've had, a lot of guests that have come on the show don't necessarily see that. They still kind of view themselves as a specialist when in actuality they are either a polymath or generalist or something like that, depending on their age and experience. And it's interesting to think about how when they come on the show and I kind of explain that to them, their lights kind of light up and the way they kind of like accept that, like, oh wait, I am this kind of person, and it's a way for me to express myself.
I'll tell you a funny story. So
Okay.
years ago, for a number of years, I had a live radio show, national radio show on Sirius XM. And it was a lot of fun and a real challenge to do live radio. And one of the things I love to do was bring authors on and talk about their books. Because it would just, I mean, you can imagine, it's like, wow, I see a book I really like, I get to read it and then talk about the author on the air. It was really cool. So there's an author named Susan Cain who wrote a book called Quiet. And Quiet is all about how in the world of business, we don't spend enough time paying attention to introverts. And that introverts are actually the most useful part of any organization because they're not running around waving their arms, they're actually sitting around thinking. And a good leader understands that introverts are really valuable. So we're doing, and I thought the book was fascinating. And so we're on the air and she says, well, let's test you. Okay, fine. Now I will tell you before she tested me, my view was that I was an extroverted person. I play the guitar in front of people. I played in front of thousands of people. I'm on a national radio show, whatever. I think I'm extroverted. And she starts going down with me. And at the end, she says, you're a highly functional introvert. You're a highly functional introvert. And I said, yeah, I had no idea. And she pointed out how I actually, every time I went out to a public event, I had to come home and sit silently by myself for a period of time to recharge. When I went into networking events and I didn't know anybody, it was absolutely horrendous, and I had to force myself to do it. I said, oh my God, I'm an introvert. And to your point, Dustin, it was, I don't know whether she went home that night after she got on the air and she said, oh, I just changed Aberman's life. But in a funny way, she did, because since that time, it's gave me a greater appreciation for introversion. But it also made me understand myself better.
I consider myself quite an ambivert, so I end up kind of getting that empathy towards both sides, where I understand where people get it's all about where you get energy from, and I get my energy from a lot of time talking to people, having intellectual conversations. But I also do like my own alone time, be able to have that kind of balance. But a lot of the time when I have guests on the show, I try to account for that. Like I'll have a little checkbox, like, are you introvert, extrovert, or ambivert? And I try to make sure I keep an eye on people's energy levels when they have come on the show, because extroverts might want to talk for longer, introverts might want to talk for a shorter time, and just having that kind of mindset there too.
Well, it seems to me you must be off the charts on empathy, which is a very good skill to have.
Thank you. I also wanted, before we get to the next question here, I wanted to share something that I created with you because I think that you'll really like the idea. I started my journey for PolyInnovator through this DIY degree that I made, this do-it-yourself degree. And I wanted to have a degree in smart city development, which there had nothing been out there really. Civil engineering, sure, and there's like one master's degree in Spain about smart cities. But for the most part, when I made this, there was nothing out there. So I was like, okay, I'll make my own. And I started curating a list of courses from like edX and Coursera and all these different platforms. I didn't even account for like YouTube videos and podcasts and books at that time. But now I kind of put them all together into this modular degree framework that I created. I made a Notion template, but you can make this really in any tool. But it's a matter of organizing your self-education, being a person who can actually teach themselves, but using the tools on all these various vast resources we see online. And I think that if we could apply that not only to like secondary education, but also to college education too, that would change the way a lot of people, especially polymathic people, learn.
I think that's true. Look, one of the interesting challenges that we have right now in society is that for many years, a college degree or a degree program is basically a sorting hat. To go back to Harry Potter, it's a sorting hat. I got into Harvard. I did Harvard. I must be part of the upper classes. Therefore, I went to Virginia Tech, got a degree in engineering. I must be a smart engineer, and on and on. So for a long time, degrees were basically a sorting hat. And employers will look at that and say, all right, well, they went to that degree. They got a good grade. They'll be able to come in and work. What's happened now is employers are starting to say, well, actually what matters is skills. What do people know how to do? And that, I think, is really providing tremendous opportunities for what you described. I mean, there's now, I think, more willingness on the part of employers to hire somebody if they can demonstrate the skill development in a field, right? Whether or not they have a degree. But the challenge is that, it's the same thing with like homeschooling. Homeschool people that are homeschooled can end up with an amazing education if mom or dad or both are really, really committed and really
Yeah.
work hard at it. But by the same token, homeschool students can be terribly poorly educated, and there's no way to really know which it is because of the nature of, the reason why people homeschool. It's closed and it's personal and so forth. So it's a bit of a bad example, perhaps, but I would think that somebody like you or somebody who says, I want to be a great coder or I want to be whatever it is, the challenge is finding courses or coursework or certificates that will reassure the employer that you've actually achieved skill attainment. And frankly, I think that I think the biggest threat to universities, the biggest thing that employers want to do is find ways to accomplish that. I think universities, frankly, I think the model of going to university just to do a sorting hat is under enormous pressure now, and probably forever is going to be changed by what's happening right now in society and people like you.
Well, and what's interesting too is that the way I started my YouTube channel was documenting my journey because there's Gary Vee, who's a famous entrepreneur. He talks a lot about document over create. And so I started documenting what I was learning. And while I didn't always continue making that kind of content, I think that's a great way of doing that. You can make a blog post for everything that you consume, like let's say every book or every course that you take. Like, here's what I learned from this. And while it doesn't necessarily prove that you took the course per se, but it does help show that, like, hey, they're actually doing something with that knowledge. They're actually applying that knowledge in some way. That's one way of doing it. It's not obviously as concrete as like a degree, like say, hey, I did all these classes, I did all these courses, took all these tests.
Hmm.
But it is one way that people talk about doing it.
Well, it may be that, for example, just to pick on you a little bit, but if you're interested in smart cities, and smart cities, frankly, is a really interesting field to be involved in, particularly with climate change and the need for alternative energy and energy conservation. I think if anything, it's going to be a growing field. You might find that it'd be very hard to get a job in industry. So going to work for Siemens or something as somebody who's a smart city engineer, but there's no barrier that would keep you from starting your own business or working in a startup around the field and developing and showing your expertise. I mean, funnily enough, look, I don't agree with Peter Thiel's politics in the least, but one thing I do agree with them is the idea that, they are a group of people that for them, university is really just not relevant, and that they really need to go off and get their hands dirty being entrepreneurial and build something. And so I guess what I'd say is that if somebody wants to be non-traditional and find their way in the world, they're likely going to have to own that and find non-traditional ways to demonstrate competence, either an apprenticeship where they talk their way into a job, or being an entrepreneur in a startup, or something where the credentialization matters less than their gumption and their skills. Maybe the bottom line is that if you want the benefits of being a polymath, you got to bear the burden. And the burden is you don't fall into a likely category. People love to put people in categories. What do you do? I mean, this first question
What's
was,
your box?
What's your box? In DC, I mean, what do you do? They will ask you before they ask your last name. I mean, what do you do? It's a way to put somebody in a box. Polymaths have a really hard time. I got to tell you that one of the most amusing things about my life here in DC has been over the years, what do you do? What do you do? You do venture and investor, you're doing radio, you're doing the columns, what do you do? And finally, what I've started to say is what you don't understand is that there's a unifying factor in all this, which is it's all around entrepreneurship and creativity. I only have one job. It just manifests different ways. Does it make people happy? I guess. I mean, I'm employed and I have work to do, but it's not easy. It's not easy if you want to have if you want to be varied and have multiple interests. Society definitely makes it harder for you.
You have to learn how to market yourself. And this is where personal branding really comes into effect. I think for specialists, it's needed to have a personal brand. But for polymaths and generalists, you just absolutely need to have your personal brand right up to par, like perfect, as much as possible, because you have to find a way to market yourself and explain yourself to people. Because otherwise you can't communicate. They can't relate to you. And I think
Yeah.
that's one thing I've really been experimenting with mentally or like thinking on is having different marketing avenues, different funnels for different niches that you do. You have your
Mm-hmm.
musician part, you have your entrepreneur part, and you have your
Right.
own different marketing strategy for each.
You know, but the one thing I will tell you is that what I've seen over my lifetime is make no mistake about the haters.
Mm,
And the haters generally are people who are jealous as hell because you've been able to do something that they can't do. Meaning,
yeah.
most people, sadly, or many people, they go through school, they get a job after a degree, and they clutch that job like a wild animal. I mean, if you see it in organizations, bureaucracies, and places like all the time. I've got my job. I've got my job. I've got my job. I've got my power. And it's all about clutching madly to this thing that they've attained. And people who are willing to take risks, people who are willing to be non-conventional, frankly, we piss people who don't have that luxury off a lot.
Yeah.
Because if we're able to be happy and be successful, what does it say about them? So
Yeah.
it's almost like the analogy of the crab pot. You know, when you cook a bunch of crabs, they start to die slowly, but if one tries to get out, they pull it back in. Well, you know, the biggest challenge that people who are creative really have, it's the haters who are just want them to conform because it'll make them feel better.
It's
Sad but
all,
true.
it's true. I definitely experienced that myself as well.
Sure.
Pivoting here a bit, you recently took the reins back over for what's working in Washington. What do you suppose brought you back?
Well, I had a radio show on Sirius XM for years, and I had it till 2016. And frankly, the political environment got so crazy, I just
Mm,
couldn't do it anymore. It just wasn't constructive for my mental health.
yeah.
So I decided that I would do something that was more focused on trying to celebrate the community I live in and highlight all the people in the Washington D.C. region who get up in the morning and make things happen. And that's a lot. You know, D.C. is a city that outside of the United States, outside of the region, is seen as being a bunch of gray bureaucrats or politicians throwing stuff at each other in rooms. And the reality is that there are millions of people here who don't have anything to do with politics. And even the people that do have something to do with the government, they're hardworking, entrepreneurial people with some amazing stories. So I wanted to do a radio show that gave them an opportunity to focus on that. When I went in and I started my dean job, you know, deans are not supposed to be polymaths. Deans are supposed to be very rigid academic people. So I gave up a lot of the the polymath aspects of my life. I gave up the radio show. I stopped writing my columns just to reassure people that I was willing to play the game of being an academic dean. Anyway, I left the job, and you know the economy, as you know, and politics right now it's a hard moment, and everything is so up in the air right now. And what's going to happen in our society, what's happening to the economy, there is a lot of anxiety. But frankly, I'm not sure there's as much work being done about trying to find common facts that we can share to try to drive solutions. So my business partner, Mark Walsh, who's my partner in Ruxton Ventures, had taken over the show for me while I was at Marymount. And I said, you know, I think I'd like to take the show back because I really would like to drive this conversation. And he was amenable to it. So I've taken that on. And then I'm also about to take on some significant research projects to try to generate data for the broad community to define things like, you know, how can we have a better innovation community, or how can we have more affordable housing? You know, there's a
Right.
senator, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who once said that you can have an opinion, I can have an opinion, but we have to share facts to have a democracy. And I'm a firm believer in that. And I don't want people to agree with me, but I at least want them to share my same frame of reference. And so my hope is that by doing the radio show and these various things, I can contribute something in the way of reasonable content and information, like you're doing with your show, to give people something to reflect on. And they can do what they want, but at least think about it. You know,
Yeah.
don't be led around by your nose because some demagogue tells you what to think, whatever your political persuasion.
What I really like is how positive you seem about it too. Like the way you explained it and the way that your mannerisms were behind it as well. You have this mindset as like, let's just move forward. It doesn't really matter which side of the coin that you are. Let's figure
Hmm.
out what's bridging us together. I actually oftentimes avoid politics and religion on this show, despite the fact that's a deep part of a lot of people's lives, purely
Hmm.
because of just how divisive it can be. Especially like you said, around 2016 to now, it can be very decisive, and it's one of divisive. I mean, it's one of those things where not everyone's going to agree on everything. That's okay. Let's figure out what we can agree on. Let's see what we can do with that.
Well, I think that the interesting thing about where we are as a society, frankly, is that there is money to be made and power to be had by creating a tribal mentality where you are just blind to everything else other than whatever your leader tells you to think. And it is when we talk about demagoguery, and people see demagoguery in different places. Everybody's good at identifying it elsewhere. You get a MAGA person on the show, they'll tell you for sure that Biden's a fascist, and if you get a demo on, they'll tell you Trump's a fascist. But the phenomenon is the same. There is a belief that people's ability to live their lives is being threatened by others who are just going to tell them what to think. And it makes them really unhappy because people don't want other folks to tell them what to think. So it's a real hot button. Um, and I think that's human nature. But I think in the moment, there's so much money to be made. I mean, there's on the media, political advertising, political fundraising. There's no value in the middle, right? I mean, I learned this when I had my radio show. I was my politics, to be fair, are much more Democrat than Republican. Certainly, I'm not MAGA, and I'm certainly not a socialist. And when I would have my show, I mean, I would bring people on from both sides. And my
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons I gave the show was the channel manager said to me, you had Ben Carson on your show, and I said, well, I did. But Ben Carson doesn't share your values. I said, no, he does not. And I don't really think that he's got it all going on. But you know what? Our listeners should hear Ben Carson because they should understand Ben Carson or, Carly Fiorina and so I think that uh, my optimism is driven by I do believe that fundamentally there's goodness in just about everybody when they have an opportunity to be good. And when you make them frightened and when you make them fearful, the goodness goes away. So the more that we can get people out of, and it's not going to be everybody, but if we get enough people in this country out of the thrall of demagoguery and turning on the TV and getting charged up about whatever it is, listen to talk radio, and taking a step back and say, well, wait a minute, actually, I probably benefit from healthcare, or on balance, I probably am really upset about abortion. It bothers me religiously, but you know what? Maybe it's not fair for me to impose that on somebody who's secular and doesn't share my values, as long as it doesn't affect my values. And I think that for us to survive as a nation, we have to accomplish that. So I'm throwing a lot of energy into it. Doesn't mean I'll
You're putting that
succeed.
empathy into it. It seems.
I think you have to, because look, go back in history, and you can see that the biggest tension has always been between. It's always around how do you organize society. Is society organized top down, where one person or a small group of people have all the power and nothing's distributed, or do you have a society where a large group of people have shared power? And what's fascinating is that really this idea of representative democracy, to the extent we have it anywhere, we have it in the United States more than anywhere else, is only a relatively recent phenomenon in world history. The more common organizing principle is frankly, it's a king or religious leader telling people what to think. So anytime you move away from a single point of authoritarianism to a broader group, it requires empathy, because empathy is what's caused you to think, well, maybe I shouldn't be the only one making decisions, or maybe I should be thinking about how it affects other people. So I think empathy is the yin and yang of authoritarianism. And both are equally part of our human psyche, and both are equally legitimate. They've been part of society since basically since the first cities were organized 10,000 years ago. This is the struggle of humanity. We need to be around each other because we're social beings.
Mm-hmm.
But are we going to like each other? Or are we going to hate each other?
Right.
you know? So I'm a big believer that empathy is actually not weakness. I think empathy is strength. I think that you have to be a lot stronger as a person to be willing to take a body blow to help somebody else be happy than it is to tell somebody else, screw you, I got what I want. I think actually we've got our whole dialogue in this country upside down. I mean, the strongest people in our society are people that actually turn the other cheek, not the people who poke a finger in your eye and tell you you're wrong. But that's just
Right.
me.
I like the empathy that you're sharing there. And between being a radio and podcast host, a venture capital partner, teaching, making music, all the things you do and more, how do you manage your time and discipline? In various disciplines, I mean.
I am a very interesting combination of disciplined and undisciplined insofar as that if I don't have anything to do, specifically to do, I can veg and watch football or a movie and literally not get out of my pajamas. So what I've learned over the years is that in order for me to be productive, I need to have, frankly, too much to do, not enough. The more that I have to do, the more I'm able to do. And it's actually a joke amongst my close friends. I was actually out with one of them for coffee. I value friends a lot. I think that, there's business friends, there's social friends. I mean, I know a lot of people, and I think more people know me than I know them. But friends are special, right? They really know your heart. You're lucky in life if you have 5 friends or 10. And I was out with one of my friends yesterday. And we were talking about where I'm at in life, and I got this going on, got that going on. And I looked at him and said, I don't know how I'm going to get it all done. And he said, same old Jonathan. He's same old Jonathan. He says, this is what happens. This is what happens. And you know what? You'll get it all done because you always do. So that's how I manage. I overcommit, but that because I'm very, I have a high clock. If I'm a computer, I'm a high clock speed. And as a result, I'm highly productive, and I get a lot done in a short period of time. And that's how I keep busy, and that's how I stay productive.
I'm looking at my calendar right now. Completely agree. It's the same thing for me.
Exactly.
I worked at a recreation center for over a decade, where I taught personal training, swimming, a lot of pool stuff mainly. But at one point, I had 6 different roles in that place, and I was getting pulled every which way. And that was one of my favorite times while working there, my tenure there, because I was able to just be constantly busy, and people were constantly trying to fight for my time. But it was just one of those things where that felt the most at home to me, being that kind of craziness.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think actually that's not surprising to me because, look, polymathic people, if that's a word we just coined, but polymathic people are not polymaths by accident. They're polymaths because they're intensely curious. And I think that their life strategy in life is to experience as much as they possibly can. Whether polymath people believe in the hereafter or not, and I've seen both kinds, like I see all kinds, whether they believe in, heaven or not, they all believe in the here and now very deeply. Right. So in a funny kind of way, you know what I'm saying? It's like the fact that you had 6 different jobs doesn't surprise me in the least, because you would have been bored if you had one. The fact that you have outside interests other than work is not surprising. It's all the same mentality. It's what I do today. What am I doing tomorrow? And am I jamming as much as I possibly can into each day? Because we only have so many days, so why not just make the most of it?
This leads me into a question I ask all my guests pretty well, actually, is what is a polymath to you?
Oh, Leonardo da Vinci. When I think polymath, I think of the Renaissance artists. I think about somebody like, Da Vinci, who was a painter and an architect and a designer and a thinker about society. Or, Michelangelo, who was the most, easily one of the greatest sculptures of humanity's ever had, the best or almost the best. And yet also an unbelievable painter. And go to Sistine Chapel and look at what he did on the roof and the far wall of the Sistine Chapel. And trust me, within the context of art and knowing art, that was just extraordinary. And yet you go to Florence and look at the David and just the perfection of that. I think that for me, polymathic people are people who do lots of interesting things. They don't do one thing. Now, I just gave 2 examples of people who I admire because they were spectacular. I don't think that polymath people need to be spectacular. at what they do. I think they need to be the kind of people who want to do different things. We tend to use polymath in our society like a savant. It's like, oh my God. Look, so, go to Spotify. You can find an album or two that I've done. Did it because I wanted to do them. I like playing guitar. Am I the best guitarist that ever lived? No, I'm not. Am I good? I think so. Will you hear something and say, oh, that's pretty nice? Yeah. Is it selling a million copies? No, it's not. Am I polymath? I think so. Am I extraordinary talent? No. I'm just good.
I think so.
And am I a good investor? Yeah, I'm not bad. Am I Mark Andreessen? No, I'm not. If I was Mark Andreessen, I don't know. Maybe we'd be doing this show from my yacht. I have no idea.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to point out that being curious and willing to do different things should not be predicated on whether or not you're world class. It should be predicated on whether or not you like it. Because if you like it and you're happy, then you're living a good life. And I think that's really what, to me, polymath really is. It should be is, if you're the kind of person who is easily bored by doing the same thing again and again, don't let the haters tell you should be happy, because the haters want you to be miserable because they're miserable. Screw them. Go be happy.
A lot of those haters are coming from that specialist mindset, and they kind of quash their generalist dreams by becoming a specialist in a way. So they're hating on you.
Right.
I
Exactly.
also want to mention too, if either one of us gets a yacht, we should definitely do another interview, but in person on the yacht.
You're on. My money's on you. I think you got further to run. I'm happy rolling along the way I am.
Well, and considering that, speaking of smart cities that we did earlier, there's also seasteads where I might actually be on like some kind of oceanic platform down the line,
Okay.
20 years from
All
now,
right.
something like that.
Well,
So it might actually work out.
Keep in touch. I warn you though, I get seasick in bathtubs, so we're just going to have to figure that one out.
So I also want to mention too that I've kind of alluded to a couple times is this idea of a multidisciplinary spectrum. So you have like the jack of all trades, which are like a novice in many different areas, the generalists, which are more maybe medium to deeper level knowledge, and you have like the polymath, which is the expert in 3 or more different areas.
Mm-hmm.
But one kind of thing that I don't know if I've necessarily coined per se, because there's kind of other similar ideas out there, but it's like the universalist polymath, someone who's even farther along than a polymath would be, and that's kind of like Da Vinci. So a lot of people, when they hear polymath, they think of Da Vinci and they think, oh, that's out of reach because he had 15 or more disciplines, like expert level disciplines.
Right.
But that's why I kind of considered him more of a universalist polymath, because he's he's extreme kind of thing.
I think that my guess is that I'm sure there's been one more science fiction story written that Da Vinci was actually a space alien who got stranded. I mean, the guy was just so far off the charts and everything he did. That it really does. But it's funny. I mean, you look at some in our society today. I mean, you look, for example, at some athletes. I mean, you look at somebody like Michael Strahan. This is an example. Strahan was an amazing football player for the Giants. He was really just amazing. And now he's a TV personality, and he's really good at what he does. And I'm willing to bet that if you play golf with him, he's probably a good golfer, and he's probably a very thoughtful person. He's probably well read. He's somebody who I think would fulfill the polymath image pretty well. I mean, Michael Jordan was the greatest basketball player that ever lived. He's not a bad businessman.
Yeah.
He's a billionaire now. I mean, he's more than just a pretty face. LeBron James. I mean, so polymaths are everywhere. I mean, you look at some of the people that are serving in politics. I mean, Mark Warner, Senator Warner, Virginia, is an old friend of mine. He's a great senator, but he was a really, really, really smart venture capitalist. And before that, he put together a lot of what we take for granted now in the wireless companies.
Yeah.
And when he was a kid, I mean, he kids around about how he was a couch surfer until he found, he'll tell you quite happily, he was a couch surfer until he figured out, the wireless angle. So I think they're everywhere. I mean, I think they're amongst us, and we do ourselves a disservice by focusing on Da Vinci or Michelangelo.
Yeah. But even like Arnold the Terminator too, California governor, he's also a movie person, bodybuilder, that kind of thing. Another great example. But
it's funny, if you think about him, he's a great example, I think, of a driven person who wanted to have a full life.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, the guy basically was a weightlifter. Was he Austrian or something? And comes to this country, he could barely speak English, and then look what he ended up doing with his life. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, he would become president if it wasn't for that one law.
He might have. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
So I definitely have one of the links to your Spotify down below for the jazz, the soothing jazz. And
Oh,
so
cool.
from guitar solos and singing to relaxing jazz, you have a range of music you make. What do you want to try next?
Music wise,
Yeah.
it's funny you mentioned that because I must admit I'm having a little bit of a writer's block right now. So the first album was a labor of love. My brother is an excellent drummer, excellent drummer. Now, he's a great example of somebody who's a specialist. When we grew up, um, we were both musicians. He wanted nothing more in life to be a drummer. That's all he wanted. And with that level of dedication, he has had an amazing career. I mean, he has many Grammys to his name. He played with Stevie Ray Vaughan for a while. I mean, it's just incredible. We decided to do an album celebrating our childhood in Philly, called Long Time Coming, Aber Bros. And it was just a fun, 5 rock songs that I wrote,
Mhm.
and it was fun. So I got that out of my system. And then the jazz album was last year because a friend of mine put on a Lee Ritenour album. He's a great jazz player, and said to me, "You can play like this." I said, "No, I can't." He said, "Sure, you can." So, challenge offered and challenge met. So I'm not quite sure. One of the interesting things about being a creative, and I know you can relate to this, is that once you've sort of released a couple of things, books, albums, any sort of creative instantiation, there is a question of, well, do I really want to do the same thing again? Doesn't it get kind of boring? So I've actually gone to my home studio and tried a couple of things there last month, and at the moment, nothing's really singing to me. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. Um, I probably will eventually put something together because, frankly, I like doing it. And, I
Yeah.
have at least 1,000 fans. I mean, I owe them a new album.
Yeah.
It's at least according to Spotify. Look, so far, I think on royalties, I've made $7. I'm clearly well on my way to a successful music career.
Well, definitely since Spotify kind of underpays their artists, but that's a whole other topic
Well,
right there.
if you have a top flight song, you can make millions. But if you are just like the whole music industry, like many parts of our society now, are winner take all.
Yeah.
It's the way it is. It's winner take all. So, I mean, God bless Taylor Smith. That's Taylor Swift. She has done an amazing job. I mean, talk about somebody who's managed her career really, really well.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, winner take all. I mean, that movie and the whole thing. I mean, good God. And now she's taking over the NFL. I mean, where will it end?
She
Anyway,
takes over all the towns she visits too, economically
she
wise. So
does.
it's crazy.
Yeah, but she manages a career great. Look, I'll tell you what.
Yeah.
I got an enormous amount of respect for her when I knew somebody who had a friend who was working on her crew, and she gave everybody in her crew really large bonuses, completely unsolicited for all their hard work, like the truckers and people.
Hmm.
And eventually got press, and it was cool. It did, but she didn't do it for press. She did it because it was the right thing to do. And that kind of stuff means a lot to me when I hear stuff like that. I like hearing what famous people do when nobody's looking.
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Nintendo, and I'm pretty sure at one point this might have been like in the mid 2010s or something like that. Nintendo was hitting some hard times because of the Wii U failing on them, and some of their presidents and higher ups took like half pay just so their lower tier people can actually get better pay or
Mm-hmm.
the regular pay, whatever it was.
Yeah. I think that one of the interesting things about leadership is if you want to create a culture of selflessness and empathy, it has to start at the top. So I have a CEO of one of my portfolio companies who really believes this a lot. And I had a very interesting conversation with him just the other day because he he wants to pay everybody in the team significantly more than him. Significantly more. Not like $1 more, like significantly more. And I said to him, I said, look, you're the CEO, you're the founder. He said, yeah, I know, but I want a culture of teamwork. I want people to really understand that it starts at the top. And I eventually managed to convince him, you need to make a little bit more than everybody else, not a lot, but you are the CEO. It's going to look weird. You got to be mindful of how it looks on the
Perception.
outside. But it was just a fascinating conversation. I have another acquaintance who was a partner in a law firm, and he was by far the biggest generator at the firm. So he could have taken just about everything, all the money, because all the clients are his. And at the end of every year, he'd walk down the hall and he'd go to the young partners and he'd hand them the clients. So you're going to be this lawyer's, you're going to be that client, you're going to be a client. And so he levelized the compensation and took tens of millions of dollars out of his pockets every year and gave it to his colleagues because he realized it was more important for him to have a team of 50 people that were happy working hard together than him being at the top with 49 employees. And that always stuck with me because he didn't have to do that. Nobody expected it, but he just did it. And I think that is one of the hallmarks of leadership is you have to walk the walk and you have to sacrifice a bit if you expect other people to sacrifice.
It definitely also builds everybody up too. Like
Mhm.
it's not a selfish thing, but it is kind of in a way you're helping yourself by helping others in a way too.
Absolutely. It comes back to empathy again. You got to be wired. I mean, look, you got to be wired up. You got to be wired up to get satisfaction from other people's happiness. If you are, then you'll be what I call a servant leader, and you'll delegate authority to get it back. You'll take stuff out of your pocket and give it to somebody else because giving gets you back more than just taking. But you have to have the mentality, and not everybody does. Many people are too insecure to give because they're afraid they won't get it back, and those
Yeah.
people tend to be much more authoritarian,
Yeah.
because they don't want to run the risk of losing their power, right?
Well, going back to your singing, actually, when I first heard you singing on your YouTube channel, you hit the higher notes almost like Meatloaf does with his voice,
Oh
and
no!
I was wondering, were they inspiration to you?
So I'm old enough to remember when Meatloaf came out, and he just came out of nowhere. I mean, it was what the hell is this record? I mean, Bat Out of Hell was just it. It was one of those records, and I'm dating myself calling it records, but there's certain albums, right? But there's certain albums
Sorry.
that just come out. No, it's fine. I mean, like some of Kanye's stuff, it just comes out. It's like there in every generation there are artists that come out and just do stuff that is so out of left field and so unexpected, just changes the genre. And uh, like the Eagles. I mean, we
Mm.
take the Eagles for granted now, but in the late '70s, pop music was just oh my god, it was just a morass of just insipid crap. I mean, just bleh. And they and a few other bands really changed the role of harmony and instrumentation in modern music. But yeah,
Mhm.
Meatloaf sings from the heart, always sang from the heart. And I'm not the world's best singer by any stretch of imagination. Um, so I sing from the heart. Same way I play the guitar from the heart. People will say to me after a gig or after I play a solo, they'll say, where'd you, where'd that come from? And
Mhm.
I have no idea. I mean, literally, the essence of creativity is you may have tools like know what key you're playing in and what scales work and licks that have worked. But at the end of the day, when you're really being creative and you're really in the moment, you honestly don't know where it's coming from. That's what makes it so much fun. The unpredictable nature.
Sometimes when I'm singing, like that's the only time I feel something is when I'm singing something from the heart. So I understand that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll tell you, I've got a singer in my band now, Patrice. She just I mean, she's unbelievable. I mean, sometimes she sings and you're just like, oh my God, that is so sincere and so powerful.
Soulful seems like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's magical. Absolutely.
Something we hadn't touched on even before the call is that like I actually taught myself how to sing by going to karaoke for better half a decade, I guess you could say. And I would go religiously just so I could learn and get enough practice. And yeah, and most of the
Well,
time when I sing, I try to sing from the heart.
dude, you must have some talent because I'm telling you, I've been to karaoke and there are people that no matter how many times they go, they still suck. So hats off to you. I
Like
mean,
comes back down to that like self learning though.
so I worked for one of my first jobs. I worked for a Japanese company back in London as an economist, and I was the only American. It was all my coworkers were Japanese, and
Mhm.
you haven't lived. You haven't lived until you're up for the karaoke bar, 2 o'clock in the morning, where everybody is absolutely slaughtered on scotch, and you have got these incredibly uptight, somber people during the workday that are singing Elvis Presley. I mean, like "Love Me Tender," like you want to start weeping. But again, maybe they weren't that good, and we were all just so hammered it didn't matter. But
Yeah,
I
that's
don't
kind of
know.
the point. It's just enjoying.
Yeah, that is kind of the point. But you got Mr. Nakasone singing "Love Me Tender." It was obviously you can tell I still bear the scars.
Yeah, yeah. I also run karaoke now. For the last few years, every once in a while, I'll be a DJ for the karaoke, and just seeing the people that come in, and it's always fairly funny too when you see someone who's kind of meek and timid, and they
Mhm.
go on stage and they sing very soulfully and like very from the heart, and like you just did not see that coming.
It's great. It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
So you spent over 2 years with Ruxton Ventures. What has been some of the greatest investments you think that you've all invested in?
Well, so the funny thing about making investments is that it's like having children. You know, you love all your kids, and
Yeah.
and the funny thing about it is entrepreneurship. So I got a great piece of advice. Actually, it was from my partner Mark years ago, and I was a venture capital lawyer, and I decided I wanted to start Amplifier Ventures, the firm that I owned, before I joined Ruxton. Mark said to me, he said, "Why are you doing it?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing it because I want to get rich." And Mark looked at me and said,
Mm.
"That's the wrong answer. You know, if you want to be an entrepreneur because you want to get rich, please don't do it because being rich as an entrepreneur is it's about execution, but it's also, frankly, it's about luck. A business can go one way or another, and you just don't know. I mean, you may just be unlucky, and so you better like the journey." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Look, you'll know you're an entrepreneur when you go home from work one day and you think that you're completely screwed, and you wake up in the morning and you realize the night before you're optimistic, but
Mm.
you still feel happy going to work." And I thought that was the most incredibly stupid thing that anybody had said to me. And I sort of dismissed it. But then I had some reversals early on in my business, primarily around fundraising, because fundraising for a new fund is just a form of brain damage, and I don't wish it on anybody.
Mm.
And I realized that my life as a fundraiser was horrible. I hated it, but I still liked the journey. I still liked that it was my mess. And so for me and Mark, both being accomplished people, and Mark in a funny way is also a polymath. I mean, he's done government service, he's done the fund, he's been a great entrepreneur, he plays an amazing blues harp. Uh, what he and I realized 2 years ago was that we both really wanted to find people that we would matter to, that we could really help and get the satisfaction of helping. So all of my investments right now, what they all have in common is they have entrepreneurs that we really like as people and really value them and like their businesses and are getting enormous satisfaction out of growing them. Some are growing better than others. A couple are just killing it. Um, but they're all satisfactory personal relationships. I mean, even we have one that's going to go out of business soon, and we're still really good friends with the founders. And I mean, I'll work with them again because they're just good people. It's really satisfying. So now, if you're asking me if I had to choose one of my kids that's going to be hugely successful, um, I'll tell you there are a couple that I think if things go right, they're going to be really important. The one that I think is the most socially important is a company called Advisorly. Advisorly was founded by a founding team that wanted to make sure that community college students could get into four-year universities. And they've created a marketplace and they're attracting top flight universities around the country to come to this marketplace to offer a space to community college students because if you're sitting in a community college in California, you might not know that Texas A&M would be thrilled to have you,
Mhm.
but Texas A&M would be thrilled to have you, and so would Union College, and so would Whittier and a bunch of other universities. So that's like a double bottom line investment. It's growing like crazy. It's going to be a huge marketplace, and I think it'll be financially successful. But it's also going to, if it's successful, change the nature of education.
Help a
And
lot of people too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so I like that. Another one I'll mention briefly is we have another portfolio company that, frankly, has unbelievably good technology for preventing election interference. And we really would like to see that technology used everywhere to protect elections from, frankly, the Russians trying to make us chase our tails. And they're making
Yes.
some progress in that. And we'd like to see them make a lot of progress because we think
Hmm.
Mark and I feel very strongly that, again, if people have good information and they're not spun up by demagogues, they'll make good decisions. So those are just
Yeah.
two examples. We like to have businesses that make a difference.
That's why I thought I'd be good to ask because I figured there'd be something that will pop up from that. What gets you
Mm.
most excited in the venture capital world? stuff like that. Basically, I guess.
Yeah, it's that. I mean, it's that it's the what's really funny is what I realized is that I loved the fun of being in a band and
Mm-hmm.
writing songs together and imagining what life would be like if we hit it big. That sort of that shared enterprise feeling. And what I realized was that while I was never going to be, you know, a, a musician of that type because I had too many other interests, that feeling of being part of a team and making something happen was very important to me. And so for Mark and me, it's really that. I mean, it's funny. What's really interesting is when you cut through it all, we invest to make money, but we invest because we want to matter and have salience and have a satisfying relationship. We never just put money in a company. We're just not interested. And in fact, we have companies where we haven't put money in, and we basically have an equity stake because the founder just wants to be able to talk with us all the time. So,
Yeah.
it really is a function of working with people who need our help and value our help. That's what makes us happy.
Especially since I definitely see that teachiness in you, if that makes sense. As someone who's taught swimming for a decade and personal training, like I get the understanding of like if you have something you want to share with them and teach them, it's
That's
just a
right.
natural part of life for
It,
us.
it's very similar, and I've taught thousands of students over the years, in more graduates and undergraduates and various MBA programs, but around a lot of students. And I keep in
Hmm.
touch with a lot of them thanks to LinkedIn. You really can see how people's careers develop. And one of the things that I just love the most is when I see a former student of mine do something that makes them more successful, starting a new company, selling a company, getting a new job. And I'll often reach out to them and comment because I just feel really happy. And the responses are always so heartwarming. It'll be whether it's a private message or public message. It'll be, you know, I learned a lot from you and what I do all day. You inspired me, and I'm like, God, what's more important than that? You know,
Hmm.
it's just amazing. Thank you. I thank all of them for telling me that because it makes it worthwhile. But that's what teaching is about, I think.
I had a teacher who I had my last year of high school, and just the way his empathy was and the way he taught, like he didn't do homework really. He did homework maybe a handful of times throughout the year, and that was
Hmm.
usually because it was super important, and so pretty much everybody did it because it was so rare.
Hmm.
And even after I graduated high school, I mean, this was a decade ago, I still kept in touch with him. And it was interesting to think about how when I was teaching in the pool, he started coming there because he started getting on the older side, and he started walking around the pool just to get that cardio and a little bit of resistance. And it was nice because I got to sit down and talk with him or walk with him in the pool. We eventually went and got tea at the mall one day too, and it was a nice relationship I had with him. Sadly, he did pass away over quarantine, not ironically
Hmm.
due to COVID, but just due to something else. But it was one of those things where a couple years before that, I spent a lot of time with him because he was in that place, and I was able to kind of share that appreciation to him.
I'm sure he valued that a lot. I mean, my guess is that probably meant more to him than just about anything he could have done. Trust me, I'm sure of that.
It's actually kind of hard to talk about it. I don't know. Yeah. Last question here is, what do you have coming up that you're looking forward to?
I am in the process, as I say, of working with a group of people in the Washington community to really take a run at trying to define what the big challenges are in our region and how we're going to solve them. Whether
Mm.
it's affordable housing or how to have more startups, things of that nature. And we're going to have a series of kickoff meetings about that over the next month or so with various community leaders. I'm looking forward to that. Uh, I'm always looking forward to my next investment, just because it's just so much fun getting to know somebody new and learn about their business. I'm looking at a couple companies right now that I think are really cool. And I think that I'm just looking forward to continuing to find interesting things to do just to keep myself engaged and stay healthy so I can enjoy the blessing of being alive, honestly. It's a real gift. I mean, it's just whatever else you can say. It's a real gift to get up every morning and just opening your eyes and being here. It's a gift. Don't take it
There's
for
almost kind
granted.
of like a stoic approach there too, where it's like you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, so being able to wake up today and enjoy the day.
Absolutely. A very good friend of mine who's Hindu explained to me one day, she said, happiness comes and goes, but joy if you live a joyful life, then joy abides. And I've really taken that on as a very important life lesson. I try to find, like I said, I mean, I think you would never find, if you came and caught me having my morning grape nuts and coffee, you never find me sitting there thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I'm alive.
Mhm.
All
Even on
right.
the days I don't want to get out of bed, I'm still excited for like just life.
Exactly. It's like my eyes
Yeah.
are open. I'm alive. Let's go do something interesting. What a blessing.
Not to this is obviously an interview about you, so not to make this much about me, but I wanted to share something with you because it's pretty recent in mind. I actually went to my first conference last year, and which was surprising considering how my age I should have experienced more, but it was really fun. I got to meet a lot of people. I went with the whole intention of just networking. That was my main thing. But when I came back, I actually got deathly ill. I had
Hmm.
contracted Legionnaire's disease,
Oh,
Legionella,
geez.
from
Wow.
the conference, and caused pneumonia and like fluid in my lungs. And for the entire month of September, I was super sick.
Wow.
And this was the first time in my adult life I had to go to the hospital. And it was one of those things where it was pretty scary. It's like, okay, like, man, that is something that could have gone way worse. It took a while for them to figure out how to heal it and give me the right antibiotics.
Hmm.
But once they did, I felt like, okay, cool. I was able to go back to my way of life. But it was scary. And 1 week into into being sick, I actually had gone out for a friend's birthday. And even though I was ill, super ill, I wanted to show him support. He's always showed me support. And we're sitting at the back of the karaoke bar because that's how we met, was karaoke. And for the first time out of my decade of going, someone had brought an AK-47 to the bar. It was automatically modified too, no less. And it was one of
Oh,
those things where, luckily, he didn't shoot anything. He was just some kind of crazy incel who eventually got arrested. He was dumb and put the gun down, and the door guy took it and ran off and managed to save everybody. But it was one of those things where I had
wow.
two near-death experiences in the same month. It was just kind
Hmm.
of a enlightening moment, if you will.
You never know. I mean, just
Yeah,
not to be too morbid, but literally,
yeah,
you never know. And that's the thing that I think. Look, one of the interesting things with the human condition is because our mortality is such an incredibly powerful thing, and we live our lives to deny it
mm,
because it's scary. I mean, yes, okay. I have friends, I'm sure you do too, who fundamentally in their hearts believe they're going to heaven. And I am so happy for them that they have that strong belief. I think they're so lucky. But, as a friend of mine who was a Catholic priest once said to me, he said, Jonathan, you, you have the will not to believe. And I thought, I didn't mean it as an insult. It's just, that's just the way you're wired up. You believe you believe that people should be moral, but you're not going to believe in heaven no matter what you do. And I thought,
yeah.
he's probably right. And I suspect that many people are in that camp, right? They just don't know what's going to happen. They'd like it to work out, but all they can count on is the here and now. And one day they're going to die, and the world's going to continue to spin, and it's scary. So I
Mhm.
think that people want to push that away because it's scary. But the problem is, if you push it away, then you also push away the fact that each day is one more day than you might not have. And you follow me? So it's like I
Yeah.
think I think you have to embrace your frailty and your mortality to have a happy life. Otherwise you're just running from the fundamental reality, which is we're here and we're not.
There's an Easter quote that brings me a lot of solace, and it goes, yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, so it's not guaranteed, and today is a gift. That's why it's called the present. And it's one of those
Exactly.
things where I think that if we can appreciate that gift, that's what's cool.
Absolutely. And I hope that, again, it's easy to say when you got money. It's easy to say when you have a full belly. I'm not, I hate victory lane entrepreneurs. I hate people who do these events and they're like, you should just be like me. Because for me to say you should be like me is useless. I am who I am because of life experiences I had. But I do feel very strongly that if you have in your mind's eye to try to create a life where you have salience, your life has meaning, and your experiences are new, you're more likely to end up having those things than if you just live your life in fear. That's
Yeah.
all. That's all I'd say. If you live your life in fear, you're never going to have a big life. If you live your life looking outward, you may have things along the way. But going back to my buddy Mark when he said, you better like the journey, and I thought he was full of crap. He's actually kind of right. And of course he tells me that from time to time, and I kind of give them, hard time.
You
But
gotta give them a, yeah.
yeah, but that's the nature of having partnership with people. Sometimes they get to tweak you, and you just have to put up with it.
I get that with my friends too.
Yeah.
Before I get to the outro here, I just want to thank you for spending that today, your gift with me here and
Oh,
with the audience.
well, thanks. And if you are interested in keeping an eye on me, LinkedIn. I probably post more on LinkedIn than anywhere else. I can't get excited about X at the moment, and
Yeah.
Facebook kind of jumped the shark. So, you'll find me. I'm the only Jonathan Aberman on LinkedIn. You'll find me and follow me. That's where I tend to put my career stuff or what I'm up to. And if I could ever be of any help to somebody, hopefully I've inspired some people. Maybe 20 years, somebody will get in contact with me and say, you were in my life. Hope not.
Thank you. Well, and that's actually perfectly transitioning to the outro because I asked where can people find you online. LinkedIn's the best place. I definitely agree with X. I like Threads, but it's not replacing X just yet.
Oh, yeah.
And there is just a little tangent. There is a cool app that's coming out called, or it is somewhat out, called Yup, like yup.io, where you can cross post between different places like Blue Sky, X, and Threads, which is like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like that would make me actually active on them. But that's
Maybe I'll
just
check that out. I just look at the moment. Social media is just it was it's a great tool, but it's killing society right now. I'm not a big fan. Just not a big fan at all.
This once again, this is Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator, and Jonathan Aberman on the Polymath Podcast. Thank you for being here.
Glad to do it. Thanks for asking me, man. Appreciate it.